There's a question that follows a lot of people through their whole lives. What is my purpose? It gets louder in certain seasons. When a career ends, when the kids grow up, and the house goes quiet. When a relationship changes shape. When you finally get the thing you worked years for, and it doesn't answer the question underneath it. Or when you simply wake up one ordinary Tuesday and realize a decade has gone by and you still can't explain in a single sentence what any of it meant. So, we search for answers in the places we have been taught to look, in our work, in a calling, and something we love enough to give our time and our lives to. We ask people what they see in us. We ask God for directions, and we wait for a sign clear enough that we'll know exactly what to do. There's nothing wrong with any of that. But I have started to wonder whether the question itself points us in only one direction. We ask, what is my purpose? And immediately return towards the future. What should I do next? Where am I supposed to go? Who am I supposed to become? Now, what if there's another direction worth looking at? What if, instead of always looking ahead, we turn around and look at the life we have already lived? Not out of nostalgia or to relive the past, but to see what may have been there all along. Because a life can reveal things slowly that no single moment ever could. Most of us experience our own lives too close up to understand them. Nobody lives 20 years at once. We live Tuesday, then Wednesday. We make decisions. We encounter disappointments. We have conversations that change us. We take a job. We have a child. We move across the country. An idea lifts us up for a season and then quietly fades. We start something we never finish. We outgrow something we once thought we wanted. And every now and then, something we thought we left behind finds its way back to us. We remember our lives in pieces, and naturally, we file those pieces by when they happened. Like, for example, that was our childhood. That was my first marriage. That was the before the kids. Those were the corporate years. That was a hard stretch. That was something I tried once and eventually let go. We divide a life into chapters so we can hold it in our own minds. But the truest thing about us may not follow those divisions. They can show up again and again in parts of our lives that seem completely unrelated. That might be exactly why purpose is so hard to locate. We keep studying the chapters when we should be tracing what traveled through them. I want you to listen to this very carefully because what I'm about to share is something I almost missed in my own life. I didn't set out to find it. I simply began noticing something that had been there all along. A handful of memories surfaced recently from very different stretches of time. One reached back more than 30 years. I would take my niece and nephew, who were 5 and 6 years old at the time, to the waterfront and tell them stories. They would be the main characters, and with wide eyes, they would hang on to every word. Years later, I did something almost identical with my son. Under the open sky at night, we would look up at the stars. He was the main character, the hero. I didn't recognize the significance of either memory at the time. I wasn't thinking about a gift. I certainly wasn't thinking about a calling. I was simply doing something that came naturally to me. Much later came writing, then speaking in front of rooms full of strangers. None of it followed a plan, and most of my life, I never once set those pieces beside each other. When I finally did, the picture surprised me. This wasn't a new interest I recently developed. I had been telling stories in one form or another for most of my life, and I had never recognized the pattern running underneath it. That left me with a question far bigger than storytelling. How does something stay present in a life for decades and go completely unread? I think part of the answer is that what's closest to us is often what we see least clearly. Some skills we remember learning. We remember the struggle and how long it took to get better. But other things feel so natural that we never think to examine them. We just say, that's something I've always done. It sounds so ordinary, but listen to it again. I have always done that. There may be something important inside those 5 words. Not necessarily a career or some grand assignment, but something that tells us a little more about who we are. I can tell us what keeps pulling our attention, how we naturally move through the world, and what comes easily to us that may not come as easily to someone else. The trouble is, familiar and being familiar has a way of making things invisible. If people have confided in you since you were young, you may simply think of yourself as a good listener. If you naturally bring order to a mess, you may never see it as unusual. You just walk in and start organizing. If you have always made something beautiful, question what others accepted, gathered people together, or noticed what other people overlooked. You may not think any of it is remarkable. You experience it as yourself. There's a second problem. We have grown used to talking about purpose as if it must eventually become a job title, as if the finish line is being able to say, this is what I was born to do, and then attach an occupation to it. But purpose may not fit neatly inside a single occupation. Someone who has always had an instinct to protect others might express that as a parent, an attorney, a nurse, or simply the neighbor who notices when something isn't right. Someone who naturally helps other people see what they couldn't see before might do that through art, research, leadership, or even the way they listen during a difficult conversation. How we express who we are can change many times over a lifetime, but something underneath can remain. A job ends, and we think we have lost ourselves. A business fails, and we assume we took the wrong road entirely. A dream shifts, and we write off the years we gave it as wasted. But what if the way it showed up was never the whole story. What if something deeper had been moving with you the entire time? I have lived long enough to have worn several identities: employee, mother, entrepreneur, writer, speaker. There were stretches when one identity ended before I had any idea what would replace it. Those gaps can make a person feel genuinely lost because the world keeps asking us to define ourselves by our current occupation. What do you do? It sounds like a simple question, but underneath it, if you listen closely, there's a second, harder question hiding. Who are you? Those aren't the same questions. What we do can change many times throughout our lives, but something about who we are continues through all those changes. Maybe the question isn't only, what do you do? Maybe we should also be asking, who are you underneath all the things you do? There's something else about purpose worth naming plainly. Time changes what we are capable of seeing. There are things I understand about my own life now that I could not have understood at 30. Not because I was foolish then, but because I had not lived enough to see the pattern. You can't recognize a pattern from a single moment. Patterns require repetition. They require distance. They require enough of the picture for us to see what keeps recurring. That means certain truths about our lives may simply be unavailable to us at certain ages, not withheld as punishment, not hidden because we failed some test, simply unfinished. We haven't lived enough of the sentence yet to know what it's saying. I find something forgiving in that. We spend enormous energy believing we should already know. By 25, know your direction. By 30, be established. By 40, surely you understand who you are. And if you reach 50, 60, 70, still holding real questions, it can feel like everyone else got a memo you never received. But there are things only time can allow us to see. We have to live enough of the story before we can look back and recognize what was there all along. This is where my question to God started changing shape. I have asked for direction many times across my life. I have wanted answers clear enough to act on immediately. I have wanted to know exactly where a given road was leading. And like most people, there have been stretches when I genuinely wondered whether I was hearing anything back at all. Setting the pieces of my life beside one another raised the possibility I hadn't seriously entertained before. What if an answer can be present long before we have the capacity to recognize it as one? That thought has stayed with me. We tend to picture an answer as information, a sentence, an instruction, a door swinging open, an unmistakable yes or no. But what if God can also speak through what keeps showing up in our lives, through what keeps quietly reappearing, through the instincts we exercise without ever thinking to call them gifts, through people whose lives happen to intersect with ours at exactly the right moment, through experiences separated by decades that only reveal their meaning once they are finally viewed together. Claim that every event in a life is a coded message. I don't think we are required to force that reading onto everything that happens to us. There's a suffering I would never reduce to a lesson. There are losses that don't become simple because we later find some meaning downstream of them. There are things I suspect we are never meant to fully understand, and faith doesn't require pretending otherwise. But I can say this honestly about my own life. I have begun to wonder whether there were seasons when I mistook not understanding God for not hearing God. Those two things are not the same. Maybe we condition to expect God to speak in a language we already understand. Part of growing spiritually may be accepting that understanding can arrive years after the experience itself. Some things happen at 27. Another experience comes at 41. Then another at 56. And one unremarkable day, decades later, all three come into view at once. And suddenly, you recognize the connection. The past hasn't changed. You simply able to see it differently. That's fascinating because revelation isn't only about receiving something new. It can also be seen at last what had been there all along. And this reaches beyond questions of faith. There are people who discover later in life that they have always been an artist. Others realize the question they carried as a child became the foundation of their life work. Someone may move through 5 unrelated professions before recognizing that each one call upon the same gift. Years once considered wasted may have shaped a way of seeing, understanding, or relating to others that later became essential. None of this mean every road was necessary or that every painful chapter was assigned to us on purpose. It simply means that parts of a life that once seemed completely unrelated may look very different when we finally see them together. And we may not recognize the connection until enough of the story has been lived. There's a real difference between looking backwards to judge a life and looking backwards to understand one. Judgment asks, why did I do that? Why did I waste those years? Why wasn't I further along by now? Understanding asks something greater. What was actually present there? What mattered to me before the world taught me what was supposed to matter? What kept returning even after I tried to ignore it? Where have I felt most like myself? What have I repeatedly given to others without being asked? What has remained even as my life changed? Those questions won't hand you a dramatic revelation. They probably won't produce a new career, and they certainly won't tell you what to do Monday morning. But they may help you recognize something you couldn't see before. The person you are today didn't simply appear out of nowhere. There has been a thread running through your life all along. This is why the word purpose can start to feel too heavy to carry. We expect one enormous answer, a single assignment large enough to justify an entire existence. One thing that explains everything else. And when we can't find it, we begin to believe we haven't found our purpose at all. But purpose might be quieter than that. It might live in the way a person moves through life, what they repeatedly bring into a room, what they can't easily look away from, and what continues to show up no matter how much their circumstances change. Our lives evolve, we change, but something within us can remain remarkably consistent. I used to think of becoming as a movement towards the future, becoming stronger, becoming wiser, growing into a person I had not reached yet. There's a truth in that. We are always in motion, but now think becoming has another direction. It's not only forward, it's inward and backwards, towards recognition, towards understanding, towards seeing every part of yourself as belonging to one continuous story. The child, the young adult who made real mistakes, the person who survived what she didn't expect to survive, the one who dreamed, the one who walked away from that dream, and the one who later found her way back to it. Not separate people, one life. Maybe maturity is reaching a place where we no longer have to ask which one was the real us. They all were, and each one carried a part of us forward. I recognized recently that I'd been a storyteller for most of my life without understanding what I was looking at. That discovery mattered to me, but honestly, the storytelling itself isn't what stayed with me afterward. This is what stayed. What else have I failed to recognize? And close behind it came another question. How many people are walking around convinced that they don't know who they are simply because they have never looked at their own life as a whole, not as a list of successes and failures, not as a resume, not as a collection of things that happened sorted by date, but as one life, a life with patterns, contradictions, dreams that disappeared for a while, things we thought we left behind that somehow found their way back. Gifts, so familiar we never thought to call them gifts. So today, I'm less interested in asking someone, What do you want to be? I'm more interested in asking what has been present throughout your life. What keeps returning? What came naturally to you before you ever thought about whether it could become a career? What have you carried from one part of your life to another without realizing it? And what have you dismissed as ordinary simply because it has always been a part of you? Maybe those are the places worth looking at. When the same things keep appearing across different parts of life, it may be telling us something about who we are. So set the pieces beside one another. Don't demand that they immediately make sense. Just look. Something may already be there that you have never thought to recognize. I still ask God for direction. I still want to know what's ahead for me. But I'm learning to look in another direction too, towards the life I have already lived, towards what remained, what returned, what I couldn't understand then, but can see differently now. How many times have I said, God, show me, while still standing in the exact middle of something I would only understand a decade later? How many times have I asked, who am I? Without realizing my own life had been quietly gathering the evidence the whole time. How many answers did I file away as silence simply because they never arrived in the way I was expecting? I don't know. And I suspect I'm not meant to know all of it. Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I know this much. There are things about my own life I can finally see that were invisible to me while I was living them. Nothing new had to happen for that to become true. I only had to set the pieces down beside each other and look. There may be pieces waiting in your life too. Don't force them into meaning. Don't turn your own history into a puzzle you are required to solve. Just get curious about it, about yourself, about what has remained underneath everything that changed. And the next time that old question rises, what is your purpose? Maybe don't look out only towards what's ahead. Turn around just for a moment. Look at the distance you have already traveled. There may be evidence in the life you have already lived. Not an answer printed plainly enough to simply read out loud. Maybe something quieter than that. a pattern, a thread, a recognition strong enough to make you whisper, "Did I never see that before?" And in that moment, you might understand something I'm still only beginning to understand myself. The answer isn't about always waiting somewhere ahead of us for us to go out and find it. Some answers have been traveling alongside us for years. This is Butterfly the Becoming. Thank you for being here with me today.